There's a couple weeks where I get to kind of on Monday begin praying and saying, okay, Lord, we have a couple of weeks. What would be something that might, bless the congregation based on what's going on in the world? Or other times it's, hey, what am I excited about? What am I pumped on? What do I enjoy studying? What do I want to preach? What do I want to bore all of you with? Whatever the case may be. And this just happens to be one of those weeks, and possibly the next couple of weeks as well, heading into Christmas. One of the things that I'm excited about right now, and I actually always am, is studying the sovereignty of God. Something about the sovereignty of God and the plan of God and the decree of God that just, it brings my soul, and I'm sure yours as well, such incredible peace and such hope. And obviously that's the idea that God is not a chess player who's waiting for his opponent to move. God is not a boy who kind of sets his little boat to sail down the stream, and he's just hoping the wind blows the right way so that it arrives where he wants it to. No, God is the God where even the superpowers in world history are nothing but his tools. And he has a perfect plan that he has predetermined, and he will be faithful to complete it. And obviously in a time like ours, that is a incredibly valuable and important and vital truth. There is a real sense of despondency for a lot of people right now, a lot of despair. World War III kind of potentially brewing off in the distance in the Middle East. Inflation skyrocketing, moral decline continuing to kind of hit the basement and the cellar, to the point that now our kids are marching in the streets and burning down the cities. And I think by and large, a lot of even Christians are going, is the plan of God still in effect? Does the church still have a semblance of power and impact on the world? Or should we just kind of throw our hands up and go hide somewhere in a safe, fenced-in, conservative part of the world? Now, that's happened before, and it'll happen again. But there's a reality, a truth, across the pages of Scripture, from the very beginning in Genesis 1 to the very end in Revelation, that reminds us of something that we can hold on to no matter how hard things may feel. Maybe for you in the room, it's not about what's going on in the world or the country, but this Christmas, maybe it's about something that's going on in your own life. Where you walked in the room today and you're lonely. You walked in the room today and you're depressed. You walked in the room today and you're hurting, and you're beginning to ask deep questions about whether or not God actually sees you. This truth is going to be a salve and a solace to your soul. When Isaiah took up his pen, Judah was actually on the ropes. We're talking now 700 years before Jesus arrived. And of course, you may remember that Assyria was the world power, and a man named Sennacherib was on the warpath, and he had turned his gaze to the Middle East, and he's coming after Jerusalem. And the king of Judah, Jerusalem, King Hezekiah, began to vacillate in his faith. And so Isaiah steps onto the scene to make sure that Hezekiah remembers some very important things. He tells him in verses or chapters 1 to 38 of this beautiful prophecy that there is a coming king. And then he tells him from chapter 39 to 55 that this coming king is actually going to also be a coming sin bearer. And then he goes on to conclude the book saying he'll not only be a king and a sin bearer, but he's going to be the ultimate conqueror. And right smack dab in the middle of all of that, in Isaiah chapter 40, he describes who this amazing king and conqueror is. And so if you have your Bibles, open them with me to Isaiah chapter 40. And let's work through this beautiful chapter together. And if you go, well, I wanted Christmas today, Tony, there is enough Christmas in here to scratch the itch. It's going to start with a little Christmas. It's going to end with a little Christmas, but there's a whole bunch of big God in between, all right? So you're going to absolutely love it. What Isaiah's doing, basically, is he's going to be taking Hezekiah's chin. A lot like you would a lot with your little boy, when you're wanting him to look at you, and he's going to be picking it up and saying, I want you to look up. I want you to look up into the heavens, and I want you to see your God. And I want you to compare him with everything else. And Hezekiah, I want you to find your hope and your trust, your solace in him. And this sermon will be a little different than normal. It's going to be like an airplane, and once it takes off, it's just going to soar higher and higher. My voice will probably get louder and louder. And by the time we're done, hopefully it lands in a beautiful place for you. And so Isaiah chapter 40, verse 1. Let's go ahead and start here with what we call the overture. Remember that what he's doing with Hezekiah is he's going to talk to him about the king and the sin bearer and the conqueror, but right in the middle here, he's going to make sure that he understands who this one is and what he's like. And the Christmas portion is in this first 11 verses. Verse 1 reads, "Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. Speak kindly to Jerusalem and call out to her that her warfare has ended, that her iniquity has been removed, that she has received of Yahweh's or the Lord's hand double for all her sins." And you can picture in there that Isaiah is telling Hezekiah to let the people know that one day they will have been judged for their wickedness, and that after that there's going to be coming a reprieve. And in verse 3, we know the advent of Jesus, when that reprieve comes. He says in verse 3, "A voice is calling." Of course, that's the reference 700 years later to John the Baptist. "Clear the way for the Lord in the wilderness. Make smooth in the desert a highway for our God." And the New Testament writers go back and they grab that and they say John the Baptist came and he was in the wilderness and he was paving the way for the coming of the Messiah. And then in verse 10, notice all the future tenses. "Behold," or "look close. The Lord God will come with might, with his arm ruling for him. Behold," look close. "His reward is with him and his recompense before him. Like a shepherd, he will tend his flock, and in his arms he will gather the lambs, and he will carry them in his bosom. He will gently lead the nursing ewes." And you can, although it's highly pictorial, you can already see the Christmas overtures. There's going to come a day where John the Baptist will arrive and he'll pave the way. And there'll be a messianic figure who will be a shepherd, and he'll be ready to care for the Jews, and he'll invite in the Gentiles, and he'll be the shepherd who will put his arms around them to provide care. And of course, you see in verse, if you were to jump down, 18 and 25, he goes on and he begins to do a contrast. I want you to compare this coming king, this coming shepherd with King Sennacherib. I want you to take all the kings of earth and I want you to tell me how they compare to this one. So Hezekiah, pick up your chin and take a look. And if you got your pen, let's go ahead and jump in right there. Here we go. He says, number one, I want you to look at nature. Why don't we just do our first bit of comparison here? Why don't you take just nature and compare it to your God? And in verse 12, he begins asking these beautiful questions. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? The Dead Sea Scrolls actually say, who has measured the sea in his palm? And who has marked off the heavens by the span? And calculated the dust of the earth by the measure? And weighed the mountains in a balance? And the hills in a pair of scales? So he literally says, who can take the oceans and measure them in his palm? Who, you tell me, can take the mountains of the earth and he can measure them with a ruler? And it's important to understand, friends, that in Hebrew rhetoric, when you see repeating words, those are there to make a point of emphasis because they didn't have italics and bolds on their big papyrus and they're writing. So what they do is they'll repeat things poetically to make sure you understand the primary subject. And you can see the repeating words there. Measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, marked off the heavens by the span, calculated the dust of the earth by the measure, and weighed the mountains in a balance, and the hill in a pair of scales, right? The idea here is pinpoint accuracy. He has fine-tuned the universe. The way that you would use a ruler for geometry, the way that you would use little teaspoons for baking, your God actually looks down at the oceans and the mountains and he has them precisely tuned. The idea being, Hezekiah, can you do that? How about big-time Sennacherib? Can he do that? Is he big enough for that? Is he wise enough for that? Does he have the whole earth in a measuring cup The answer is no. Behold your God. And then he moves on from nature. Number 2, jump down to verse 13. And he says, look even at the knowledge, look at education. In verse 13, who has directed the Spirit of the Lord? Or as his counselor, picture your counselor back in high school who sat with you in that weird little room and told you what classes to take. You know, who is his counselor? And look at the repeating wisdom vocabulary, has informed him. Verse 14, with whom did he consult? And who gave him understanding? And who taught him in the path of justice? And taught him knowledge and informed him? See all the synonyms again, making the point? Who was his algebra teacher? You know, who took him when he was a kid and began to train him on the alphabet? The obvious answer is nobody. He knows everything. And you can actually see the play on words. Verse 12, that word measure, is repeated in verse 13. If you saw it in Hebrew, it's the word understanding. What he's saying is the Creator's the one who fine-tuned the heavens and the earth. Oh, but by the way, the Creator never needed to be fine-tuned himself. He knows everything. It reminds me a little bit of that old cartoon with Charlie Brown when he was in class and he was talking. And Lucy walks up and she puts her hands on her hip the way she always does. And she says, Charlie Brown, seeing guys like you who think they know it all are very annoying to those of us who actually do. And in one respect, that's what Isaiah is doing to Hezekiah. Hezekiah, he puts his finger in his chest. Do you know it all? Didn't you need a tutor? Didn't you need someone to teach you? Oh, Sennacherib, do you know it all? But there is one who, in fact, does. Behold your God. That's, by the way, friends, why you see now in the modern world, the next generation are all mystical. They're mystics, right? Because for 200 years, since the time of Darwin, there's this been idea in our modern Western society that we live inside of a rational feedback loop, where humans can get to the upper levels of understanding without there being a creator and without there being a divine being. And so what happened was we hit the point of no return, where those who were intellectually honest with themselves said, listen, if this is all that there is, the rational, the human, and everything is by chance, well, then we might as well commit suicide because there's no meaning and there's no purpose. And that's why the next generation on the scene now is desperate for something mystical. Give me the cosmic, give me Mother Nature. Give me the yoga, give me the tea leaves, give me an alien, give me something. Because if there's nothing out there, then this life is meaningless and I have no need to wake up another morning. See, friends, the idea here is that there is one who comes before. All knowledge is from him, all truth is from him. The very objective propositions by which you and I live and gravity itself comes from him because he knows all things and no one ever taught him. He is God. Behold your God. And he moves on from nature to knowledge to number 3. Look at this. He says, Hezekiah, look at the nations themselves. Look at the nations. You see it there in verse 15? He says, behold twice, because he wants you to think. Hezekiah, behold. Behold. Nations are like a drop from a bucket compared to God. They're regarded by God as a speck of dust on the scales. Behold, Hezekiah, you need to think about this. You need to look at this. He lifts up the islands like Hawaii, and it's nothing but fine dust. It's a salt shaker to him. Even Lebanon is not enough to burn, nor its beasts enough for a burnt offering. All the nations are, as the Hebrew there is tohu, less than nothing before him. See, today he would look at us and go, hey, why don't you guys go back and look at big-time Assyria? Where are they at? Well, you can only find them if you go to the Pergamum Museum in Berlin and you dig up their little alabaster vials, or you look at their old cuneiform tablets that are all cracked. Oh, and what about Babylon? And what about the Medes and Persians? And what about what about Alexander the Great? Oh, and what about the great warships of Great Britain? Or what about the Great Wall? What about the old proud US of A? How's she doing, he would say. Look at the nations and what's happening to them. And then notice the terminology that he uses there. It is absolutely beautiful. He says, they are nothing to God but a drop in a bucket or a speck of dust. Who had their coffee this morning? Good. Some of you are like, give me more right now, man. This guy's yelling a lot, right? I need my coffee. I guarantee when you got out of your car with your coffee cup and you were walking in here, if one little drop had spilled out, you wouldn't have looked down. He says that's the way that God views the superpowers of earth. Or some of you like your Oakley glasses and you sport them and you get that little dust cloth out and you begin wiping it. and sometimes you blow on them. He says that is a nation to God. Not even an afterthought to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And how often do the kings of earth, the princes and the powers, stand up and go, I am in charge? He says, no, 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 you are not. That's why he illustrates there with Lebanon. Did you see that? Because back then, you might remember 3,000 years ago, Lebanon was the big city on the hill that had all the big cedars. So like today, you go up to the redwoods and you look at the sequoias and you go, that's where we're going to get all our wood to build these big towns. He says, listen, if you were to go up to Lebanon right now and you were to cut down every tree and you were to make a big pile and offer one massive sacrifice 3 miles in diameter to the living God, he wouldn't even bat an eye. His point being, folks, listen, any relationship with the living God, it is one direction only. It comes from him to you. It is asymmetrical. The creator has nothing. The created has nothing, no hold on the creator. You cannot maneuver your way to God. You can't manipulate your way to God. You cannot climb up into the good graces of God. The only chance for a human to get to God is if God condescends to man. He says, look up. Behold your God. Behold your God. So look at nature, look at education, look at the nations. How about this one? I like this one. It's tongue-in-cheek. Look at the idols of Assyria. Hey, Hezekiah, why don't you go right now and you go look at the idols that Assyria has. Go look at Sennacherib's gods. He says in verse 18, well, to whom then are you going to liken God? Why don't we look around at all the other nations and let's see who they worship? And this is scathing sarcasm. If you have your Bible, just look at it. Get your eyeballs right on it because it's scathing sarcasm. You go, I didn't know that the Bible was so cutting. Yes, it is. He says, okay, let's talk about Sennacherib's gods. What likeness will you compare with the living God? How about idols? As for the idol, a craftsman, that's the word that he repeats again and again and again here, the artificer, the artisan, he's making the point again by repetition. A craftsman casts the idol, a goldsmith plates it with gold, and a silversmith fashions chains of silver. Oh, and if you're too poor for that, then you go out and you select a tree, verse 20, that will not rot, and then you seek for yourself a skillful craftsman, again, a carver, to come and prepare the idol, I love this, so that it will not totter. You don't find that funny? No one's laughing. It's meant to be funny. He says, let's talk about what Sennacherib worships. Oh, here's what. He goes out and he finds a tree. And then he takes that tree to make sure it won't rot. He picks the right one. He comes back into a carver, hands it to him, and then the carver whittles it down, puts a little smiley face on it, 2 little eyeballs, sets it up on his mantle to make sure it won't wiggle and wobble when the wind comes, and then big time Sennacherib comes and he bows down before that. Ooh, watch out. And the whole idea here is what we call a point of contrast. Where he says, Hezekiah, even natural revelation, general revelation, looking up at the stars in the sky, listening to wisdom shouting in the streets, understanding your conscience, which is begging you to wake up, shows you the absolute stupidity of bowing before an idol. All you have to do is walk outside and look around you, and you should understand the stupidity of bowing before a little statue. That's why he says in verse 21, look at it. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been declared to you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the founding? Come on! Yahweh, he says, is above all. Now, friends, we're going back 700 years before Jesus, and he already says the earth is a sphere, and he sits above the whole thing. Did you catch that? You are reading the inerrant, infallible, all-sufficient word of the living God. This is God-breathed, coming right to the hearts even of the ancients. And in verse 22, it is he who sits above the vault of the earth, and its inhabitants are like little grasshoppers who stretch out the heavens like a curtain. He says, Sennacherib serves stone and rock. He bows to bark. Hezekiah, behold your God. And then in verse 23, he moves on to the rulers. Look at verse 23. He moves on to the rulers. He who reduces rulers to nothing. You want to talk about your God? You want to talk about your God who oversees, he's over nature, he's over knowledge, he's over nations, he's over idols. Let's just look at all the big-time kings. He reduces rulers, verse 23, to nothing. He makes the judges of earth, there's that word in Hebrew again, to meaningless, less than meaningless. Verse 24, scarcely have they been planted, scarcely have they been sown, scarcely have their stock taken root in the earth, but he merely blows on them and they're gone. He says, you take all the princes and all the princesses and all the presidents and all the tyrants and all the warlords and you line them up and they all think they're big time for their 7 years and their 18 years and their 24 years. And he says, boom, just like wheat chaff, he blows and they're gone. And they only exist to fulfill his appointments. He's in charge of the nations. Friends, I hope that you understand this. Leaders are not elected by chance. It is not politics. Leaders are not in their roles because of politics. They're not in their roles because of money. They're not in their roles because of personal magnetism. They're not in their roles because of the power of their monarchy or their family line. They're not in their roles because of the justice of our democracy. They're in their roles because the living God put them there. And the moment that he's done with them, they're gone. I love Winston Churchill. He's one of my favorites to read. Fascinating. He was not a Christian. He was maybe a deist at best. But here's this guy who literally had watched 4 wars, had served in 3, and by the age of 5 was studying Napoleon and really felt that he was going to help impact Western society to protect it from evil. And do you remember what he said when the bombs from the Nazis started dropping in 1940 on England? He takes to the airwaves and he says, we are going to be men and women of valor. And then he finishes, remember this, the end of his speech, and he says, quote, as the will of God in heaven, even so let it be. Did you catch that? Not a Christian, not in a personal relationship with God, not bowing the knee to Jesus Christ, but even an intellectually honest agnostic acknowledges what? That humans are not in charge of what's going on down here. Sennacherib's not in charge, and Nebuchadnezzar was not going to be in charge, and Caesar was not going to be in charge. Oh, and by the way, fast forward a little bit. Winston Churchill was not going to be in charge, nor was Hitler. And by the way, neither were the Clintons, and neither was Trump, and neither is Biden, and neither is Elon Musk. Make no mistake about it, there is only one who's in charge, and his name is Yahweh. Behold your God. And then he says, if the nations and nature and knowledge and the rulers are not enough, why don't we just take your little chin, Hezekiah, and why don't we just pull it up, and why don't we look out into the universe and the galaxy itself? You see that there at the end in verse 25? Look at the stars. Look at the stars. To whom then will you liken me that I should be his equal, says the Holy One. See, that's God coming into the script through the mouth of Isaiah. And he looks right to Hezekiah and he speaks personally. I mean, this is first person. To whom then will you liken me that I should be his equal? Who are you going to compare me to, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these stars. The one who leads forth their host by number. He calls them all by name because of the greatness of his might and his strength and his power. Not one of them is missing. And you can actually see the repeating language. He knows them by name. He knows where they are. He knows when they're going to be done. He's talking about the universe itself and how he has appointed every single star. And I know that everyone in the room knows this feeling. When you walk out into a desert night or into the mountains when no one's around and the lights of Los Angeles are all gone and it feels like the rushing of a train coming through the pine trees and you look up into the night sky seeing all the panoply of stars, you know that feeling and I know that feeling where we feel our insignificance and our smallness and our remoteness and we sit there and we go, wow! That's what he's talking about here. When you walk outside and you look up at that and you think, wow, he says, listen, it's not wow to me. I named every single one of them. And in the modern era, where we know there's 350 million whatever stars in our galaxy, and another 300 million galaxies out there, and there's billions of light years by which these stars are traveling with their twinkling light into our eye, we all stand back and we say, wow, God says, no, I named every single one of them, and they will be there until I remove them from the night sky. Behold your God. So are you impressed? Not really? That's not enough? Is he majestic? Is he powerful? Is he sovereign? And that right there, right here, is what makes the rest of this message, these final verses, so, you ready? So Christmassy. For everybody in the room who's sitting here going, I love this, my affections are going up, but I want Christmas. Because what Isaiah does is he says that God who is up there is also the God who came where? He comes down here. Look at verse 27. Why? Why do you say, O Jacob, and assert, O Israel? In fact, let's just personalize it this morning. Why do you, Tony? Why do you, Christian? Why do you, Luke, Sergio? Why do you, Nate? Jennifer, Valerie, why do you? He says. Why do you assert, my way is hidden from the Lord? And the justice that's due me escapes the notice of my God. He doesn't see me. He's blind to our issues. It's no longer the Assyrians knocking at the door, but it's now my issues at work, and it's now my issues with finances. It's now what's going on with my friends and my family. You don't see me. And then in verse 28, do you not know? And have you not heard? The everlasting God, Yahweh, the creator of the ends of the earth, doesn't become weary or tired. He's not taking a break. He's not off sleeping for the evening, taking a nap. Look at this, understanding, in context, speaking to you, to the individual, to Judah, his understanding is inscrutable. He sees it all. He knows your best. He sees your best. He's aware of what is best for you. And then in verse 29, and he gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might, he increases power. Though the youths grow weary and tired, and the vigorous young men stumble badly, yet those who wait, they stay in the tornado, they stay in the fight, they stay there in the middle of the storm, and they hold on to Yahweh. He says they, look at it, will gain new strength. It's not a question, it's not a maybe, it's not a someday, it's you will. So not only does he know your best, he is there and he is going to care for you and give you your best. He is going to love you through those dark nights of the soul. And they'll mount up with wings like eagles, and they'll run and not get tired, and they'll walk and not become weary. He knows your best, and he wants your best because he is a loving and good God. See, what we have right here, friends, in this one chapter is the trifecta of trusting God. Coming to the realization that he knows our best, that he wants our best, and that he has the sovereign power to accomplish our best. That's when we begin to trust God. In fact, I think it was last summer, I was teaching the ladies, and I was talking about something along these lines, and I actually asked the ladies, I said, hey, would anyone be willing to just let me borrow their wedding ring? So I don't remember who gave me their wedding ring. I think it was Samantha. So she was really gutsy. You know, she took off her wedding ring, and it looked pretty expensive because it kind of glittered in the lights, and, you know, maybe it was fake. I don't know. But it looked nice, and so I was going to take it from her hand, but she threw it. So she's sitting down here, and she threw it up to me, and I'm not going to do that this morning, but she threw her ring up, and I grabbed it, and I said, okay, thank you, and I put it in my pocket, and then I just went on preaching. Everyone else was watching the sermon. She was just staring at my pocket the whole time. It's my ring in there. I've only been married a couple years here. It's a big deal, right? I love my ring and the memories attached to it, right? But I went on to share a question. I said, Sam, I got to the end. I said, Sam, and I'll ask you guys all the question. Here's this beautiful ring, right? And ladies, just picture that you threw your ring up to me today. Do you trust me, Sam, that I am going to take care of your ring? And she said, absolutely. And I said, because you trust that I know your best, you trust that I want your best, which is to get your ring back, and you also trust that I have the power, at least in this context, to probably, at the end of the message, do your best. She said, absolutely. I said, but Sam, here's the thing. I didn't tell you something. A little bit later today, I'm going to be heading down to do a little bit of ministry work in Compton, and I'm going to do a little bit of work on Skid Row, and so I'm going to take your ring with me. Is it okay? Do you trust that I will bring it back to you tomorrow? Her face kind of changed. I said, but actually, Sam, it's even bigger than that, because what I'm really going to do is I'm going to be heading out tomorrow on a flight, and I'm going to be heading back then, I think it was Ukraine, but we'll just change it to, I'm going to Israel, and I'm going to be landing in Gaza. I'm going to do a little bit of refugee work there for a week, but I promise when I get back after this week, I'm going to have your ring, and I'm going to make sure that it's safe. And I'm watching her face, and Sam goes, oh. But Samantha, you know that you trust that I know your best. Samantha, you trust that I want your best. She says, I know. But what was the part that she couldn't get her mind around? 45-year-old man, not very strong, flying overseas to a war-torn part of the world. It wasn't that she didn't trust that I knew her best or wanted her best. What was the thing that she was wrestling with? She wasn't sure that I had the power to accomplish her best. She knew that I was not sovereign, and she's right. But Isaiah, in one chapter, looks at every single believer throughout history, and he says, you need to remember something about your God. Not only does he know your best, and not only does he want your best, guess what? He is the sovereign power who can and will absolutely accomplish your best. Behold your